Hey everyone listening, trying to find direction and move with intention. Welcome to Moving with Intention, a podcast by Black Sheep Coaching. We hope the episode you're about to listen to is empowering, insightful, and helpful. We hope you're moving with intention in your life and taking actions, as small as they may be, towards becoming the person you want to be and living the life you want to live. Disclaimer: this podcast may contain discussion of sensitive topics that may trigger some individuals. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health professionals or resources, and we encourage you to seek those out should you need them. Welcome to Moving with Intention. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics and one of the topics I find most interesting. Now, I'd like to preface this by saying I am not a mental health professional. I am not a scientist. I'm just somebody who's extremely interested and likes to explore and read and learn and grow. And one of the things that often comes up when we talk about, or when I read on behavior patterns and when I read on breaking habits, etc., is dopamine. Now, what is dopamine? So dopamine is a chemical that is released in our brain, and this is the feel good chemical. This is a neurotransmitter that is related to pleasure, satisfaction, um, this notion of reward. Um, it can also be a motivator for us. We do something, we get that dopamine hit, it makes us feel good. So then we do more of that thing, and then we get more dopamine, and then it makes us feel good, and then we keep going and going and going. And that's not inherently bad, in my opinion. What is bad is when we start to chase those dopamine highs, when we start to crave dopamine, when we're in a state of calm, or we're in a state of, maybe we're a little upset or a little sad. So we crave that dopamine hit to kind of bring our pleasure and satisfaction and motivation back up. And in some cases, that craving, depending on what we're chasing for dopamine, can be extremely harmful. When we talk about things like addiction and drugs, there are various drugs that are linked to big dopamine spikes, and these are highly addictive because we get that euphoria, that pleasure, that 10 out of 10 feeling good. And then when that wears off, there are things in the world that don't compare. And this is not strictly relating to drugs. I believe that there is a link between love and dopamine, sex and dopamine. And I'm not sure whether everybody reacts the same way to these various things. But if you think about your life and things that you find pleasure in, I think it's very likely that those release small amounts of dopamine for you. So when we talk about this notion of dopamine and reward, there's can be this cycle of chase the reward, get the reward, feel good, crash, seek the next reward, chase the reward, feel good, crash, chase the next reward. Oh, this reward wasn't as satisfying, so I need to chase something bigger and better. Get that, feel a lot better, feel a ton of high, crash. And if we think about this on a graph, you think about the notion of having very low lows and very high highs. I think that can point to this cycle of reward seeking behavior, craving those dopamine hits, craving those large, big wins, chasing that reward, getting that huge amount of attention or the huge amount of recognition, and getting that big dopamine hit and feeling amazing. And then the crash happens. I think over the course of my readings and my self-reflection and my growth and my path, so to speak, I've tried to examine the notion of chasing the reward versus enjoying the journey. And I think this is something that gets talked about very, very often. When we look at dopamine and we look at reward as a concept, chasing the reward can be a very slippery slope, in my opinion. We often hear the term like chasing the next high, or trying to get our fix. The way I see it, when we chase rewards, our life and our mood can be very volatile. We crash and then we get that next big high, and then we crash and then we get that next big high. And sometimes we can't even get that next big high, and then we're upset or depressed, or a plethora of uh, behavioral or mood or sleep uh, issues can arise from that, in my opinion. As I've been changing and growing and learning, I'm starting to appreciate the journey more. I'm starting to appreciate the little things and the little wins. Because when I imagine my life and I think about my happiness level, and I think about low lows and high highs, do I want to live a life where I'm feeling like a 2 one day, feeling like a 9 the next, feeling like a 1 the next, feeling like a 10 the next, feeling like 2 to 8, 2, 9, 1, 10, 3? Do I want to live that life? Because to me, that speaks to volatility. It speaks to, in my opinion, personally for myself, feeling imbalanced and feeling unstable. And when I think about it, if I'm able to appreciate the little wins and we're able to appreciate the little things along the way, instead of going 2, 10, 1, 8, 3, 9, our life starts to look like 5, 8, 6, 7, 4, 8, maybe 1 at some point. Things happen. Maybe back to an 8. And I think that's a better way to live life, in my opinion. What I'd like you to do is invite yourself to that exercise. How do you feel about the notion of low lows and high highs? And I'll give you a second here just to think about that. Is that something you relate to or identify with? And then after that, I'd like to invite you to think about what life could look like if we had a more we had less variability in our mood. We were more quote unquote stable, so to speak, as far as mood goes, more regulated. Instead of that 1, 10, 2, 8, we're kind of, every day could be a 6 or a 7, and then some days are better, some days are worse, but overall there's less volatility. I think the notion of chasing reward has been pushed by our society. We talk about what it means to be successful, and we get pushed these views and stories of, well, you have to make this much, and you have to have this, and you have to have a family, and you have to have tons of girls, and you have to have cars, or there's a lot of societal messaging, in my opinion, that tells us in order to be happy, we need to achieve these big rewards. We need to achieve these big accomplishments. And I think this perpetuates an ideology in all of us where we chase those rewards and we're not satisfied until we get them. And don't get me wrong, I don't feel there's anything wrong with ambition. I think ambition can be awesome, and I think happiness can be good. But I also think there's something to be said about being content. And I know that in some cases, this is something in a previous relationship that me and my girlfriend at the time had were discussing the notion of, are you happy? And I said, I'm content. I'm okay with my life. I have a job and I work and I have money and I'm grateful for what I have, etc. And for some people, I don't think that's understood. The notion of being content, the notion of saying, given everything, yeah, I'm content. I think sometimes that could be denial of unhappiness, but I think there are people that in moments who they are content with what they build and they are content with their lives overall. It doesn't mean there aren't things they want to work on. It doesn't mean they don't have goals. It doesn't mean there aren't things they want to achieve. I think in the overall picture of things, they are content. But when we talk about dopamine, I think dopamine being associated with pleasure, satisfaction, motivation, this can also allude to chasing happiness, the pursuit of happiness. And as part of the outro, you'll hear where, all these long journeys all start with a step. And I feel like as we appreciate the little steps along the way, instead of getting these big dopamine hits and crashes, we start to get little consistent hits of dopamine. And I feel that regulates our mood better. I feel that regulates our sleep better. I feel that regulates our emotional stability, our mental health. I feel that regulates all of that better. Now, don't take my word for it. I'd like to invite anybody listening to read on dopamine and to watch some of these videos and I'm sure like something like Huberman Lab has discussed dopamine and its effect on our behavior. Because I think when we think about craving and addiction, and I don't mean addiction as in addiction to drugs, but addiction in general, addiction to video games, addiction to working out, like going to the gym. These things can be addictive because they do provide us with these dopamine hits. So I'd really like to invite you to increase your awareness of dopamine and also to be reflective and introspective of what that looks like in your life. Are you one of these people who chase that big reward and you're only happy if you're getting that big recognition or if you have a lot of love and attention or if you have a big paycheck or big money? Because I think that that behavior, if not reined in and not kept an eye on, has the potential to lead to some very, how do I put this? It has the potential to lead to risky behavior, to lead to starting to take more risk and starting to push and push for that bigger reward, bigger reward, bigger reward. And I think it has the potential to leave us in a state where we're just never satisfied. Where you say, like, is there ever enough? Will I ever be happy? And it's funny because I think people think happiness is something that's, I think there's this notion that we're going to just eventually just find happiness. Everything's going to fit together and we're just going to find that one thing that makes us happy. But I think oftentimes we conflate happiness with these dopamine spikes. Anyways, this is one of my favorite topics. I love the discussion around dopamine. I'm a little bit of a science nerd, but I just think this concept, the concept of dopamine, the concept of reward centers in our brain, the concept of chasing rewards, the concept of craving and addictions, I think these are all very important when it comes to growth, awareness, and self improvement because I feel like this is one of the major factors that can drive our behavior. This is the pleasure seeking, the satisfaction seeking. This is the where does my motivation come from? Why am I motivated to do X? And in my personal life, when I've examined that, it is often related to dopamine and the way it makes me feel. I mean, I feel motivated to record this episode because I'm sure right now I'm getting a little bit of a dopamine hit. I mean, I'm smiling, I'm laughing. Um, and I think this notion of harnessing dopamine and understanding the consistent bits of dopamine versus the spiking dopamine, I think that's a very, very important concept. At least it has been for me. So I'd like to invite you to read more about it, research more about it, listen to more about it, because I think it's a very, very critical piece of self improvement. And that's going to lead us to our next episode, which will be discussing our needs versus wants and what exactly is the difference. Thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank you all for listening. A small reminder that you can find all our links on linktree/blacksheepcoaching. That's linktr.ee/blacksheepcoaching. It would also mean a lot if you could support the podcast by subscribing, liking, sharing, or becoming a patron on Patreon. I hope this episode assisted you in finding direction and moving with intention. And remember that big journeys start with small steps.